would you like to continue from there or here? Yeah, George. And after this, we just have 2, 3 questions, and after that, Banmali ma'am is going to give the total valedictory. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Tandon. It's always a pleasure, and good afternoon to everybody. It's always a pleasure to talk to the very young minds, and I thought that I'll divert from whatever Professor Tandon asked me to do in terms of, talking about what you have so far heard. I want to test you on something very different. When the organizers called me 2 days ago and said that we want you to be this, I said, why me? Because I'm not an expert on finance. There are others, they're all sitting on the panel with very big credentials. And I'm feeling humble in front of them. But then I said, oh, it's a chance to talk to the very young people who are going to go into the market and into the real economy. And what are the challenges and what should they focus on? Then I said, let me take this chance and talk very differently, which is not even the regulator's perspective. I don't want to, because I'm no longer in the government, and I can't have the perspective of the government. I left it about 1.5 years ago. But then I said, the topic is, and that's why I carried this, it says, transforming the Indian financial system for sustainable development. And it's always the rare part which always proves challenge. Also the exams, whenever I took, were here or in Cambridge or elsewhere, I always found the last question to be most tricky one. I said, let me handle that first. Okay, and that's why I said, let me define what is sustainable development. I'm not going to reinvent that definition. Sustainable development, as somebody said in 1972 at the World Earth Summit, is that it's about caring for the future generation without compromising the present generation. So nobody wants to compromise on the consumption that you're going to make in the present time. But while you do that, you need to also think of, how do I sustain it for the future generation? And that proves to be a very big challenge. When you're making a tax laws, you always look at the income, your own consumption. Each of us do that, my own consumption, and savings for the future, right? The same principle has been adopted by for the sustainable development. What you make certain income, you make certain GDP, you consume certain parts of it, and you retain something for the future. But what proportion of that should be retained for the future is the biggest question. We talked about, Mr. Bimal talked about the coal. I had a chance to be in the panel long ago in 1996, 97. Many of you may not have been born that time, on the fertilizer pricing. And unfortunately, fertilizer pricing remains where it is. And this is the biggest challenge that we have. And somebody said that, why not use coal? Coal is available in our own country, but we keep getting oil or gas for this. But then the coal was rejected as part of the whole analysis, because coal would give a lot more carbon in the system than what it will benefit. We will certainly benefit in terms of reducing our fertilizer subsidy. The other issues were, of course, that the oil or the gas fertilizer plant is much cheaper, so the capital investment is much lower than the coal, which is much higher, almost like double that at that point of time. So obviously, the issue of sustainability, it cannot be based only on the financial accounting. And this is where I would want to look at some of you as a budding finance person and joining the banks, etc., is not going to be based on the balance sheets. It cannot be. It has to have an economic appraisal, which takes into account the whole gamut of issues. how it impacts the people, how it impacts the project, and everything together. While it's very easy to look at the financial side because the numbers are available, but when you look at the economic appraisal, and this is what I would request the IMI to start looking at it. There are no standard methodology for that, and the people spar on the financial appraisal. But I am yet to get a good handle on that, and which is where, and this is management, so I need to cover my head before I make that. This is where the public policy differs from the MBA classes. But nonetheless, you can't say that the economic appraisal is something which we can ignore. So that is point number one, which I would want to emphasize. That it has to be, if you want to attack sustainability, or you want to not address sustainability and achieve it in a foreseeable future, then you have to talk about that. You have to take this into account as and when you go into the system and you start talking about it. So financial stability, a financial system cannot work without looking at the economic appraisal, and financial appraisal is just a part of it. Now, I want to also address another issue connected to the financial, to the sustainability, and which is a very painful two items which I'll mention on a national level. One is about where is my total factor productivity of the country, which is basically talks about the inclusion of technology in my system, in my economy. And I am sad to mention here that the total factor productivity has gone down. That means we were better off at some point of time that the technology was becoming a part of my whole economic system. But of late, it is not. The second issue is, where is my ICOR, which is incremental capital output ratio? How much of extra capital that I need to achieve 1% of growth in the economy? Which brings me to the same thing, that if my ICOR has moved from 4 to 5 or 6, then I have a challenge. How do I address that? I need to address it, not, and this is a finance class, maybe you have budding bankers, but there will be a large number of them who are engineers too. And I'm sure they are. I would want them to address the issues of technology. And that is something which this country, but I feel loath to mention that, we seem to have forgotten. When you move into the banking sector or the jobs that you are aspiring to be, all of a sudden, and I'm not painting a very dismal picture, but this is a reality. This is a costless economy. The jobs that you will do will be somebody else sitting in some other part of the world will be driving the technology, and you will only be a taker. And that is not a very happy situation for a generation which is, 60% of our, the population is below 25. And that is certainly a challenge before them, that they need to address the issue of technology, which will actually address the issue of sustainability and would put this country on a different league. Otherwise, we will continue to do this 5 or 5.5% of growth without doing anything. 1.5% or 6% or 1.2 or 5%, whatever we are getting, is an extra effort which we keep doing here and there. But if we want to achieve that 10% growth rate, where the government has thought, has set before itself, then the answer has to be technology. Various occasions, I have given this example of a report which was published by, or an example which was published by The Economist magazine for the iPod. You know, you all had iPod or something, which at some point of time, or I think it was iPad, you know, it will be one of them. But the clear point is that $220 was the cost price of that. 2.5% was the value addition in China. The balance, you know, the 97.5%, and large part of it, almost like 60%, went to America. Why? Because they were the drivers of the technology. So what did the Chinese get out of it? 2.5%, which is the value addition, which is the income which came to China. But the volume of import versus exports were very high because the equipments came and equipments went out. We have talked about 1.7 trillion Chinese bank example. Good, and China has done very well. It is at a 10.3 trillion economy, much better, and would have been able to challenge the technology aspect of it, but that remains to be a mirage for them. At this point of time, the technological input in the US economy, in the German economy, were far more. And this is where the challenge lies also for China. I'm sorry to, you know, contradict if I am doing that for some of the my bankers friend on the panel. So the answer to that is technology. So far, the present government has tried to put some attention to that in terms of technology, delivery systems, jam, all those aspects. But is that enough? Because when we talk about technology, we also have to talk about the manufacturing technology. And all our innovations or the startup companies has been in the digital media. All our Flipkarts have been on the digital media. This is very simple. But when you come to developing a new material, a new technology, an electronic system, or there will be failures, of course. But then the gains are far more. GE is not what it is today, but for Thomas Alva Edison. If Thomas Alva Edison had not produced all those patents, GE would not have been one of the top-rated technology companies. And it still values technology. It does a large part of technology. They have a big research center in Bangalore, and try and get a job there. They will say, oh, what is your, you know, they focus on the PhDs, they focus on the MTechs at the high caliber, and they want people to be manning all those positions. Somewhere we need to start focusing it and not rely only on services, because services is fine, we're still not there. I mean, 56 to 60% of our economy is of services, but there is a need for a commensurate growth in the manufacturing. No contract R&D is good enough. No ITS is good enough, because what you get is about 12 to 15% cost plus, and that is about it, which does not mean much actually. So sustainability of the jobs, sustainability of the economy is not going to have that unless we start talking about the technology per se. And this is the biggest challenge. And this is, and as you friends on the panel, as well as you go into the financial sector, you must start looking at the technology aspect. I need another 5-7 minutes and I'll be done. The third aspect, and which is where was a tendency that the regulator's perspective, and I would want to address that from the tax point of view. So probably is my, understanding. But coming back to it, can technology come from outside? No. Has ever technology transfer taken place? Very rarely. Most of the international agreements, be it a WTO, any of the MEAs, which is multilateral environmental agreement, or talk about anything which is there in the world. It talks about sustainable development, and one of the clause will be the transfer of technology. And I have been a WTO negotiator as well as the environmental agreement negotiators thing. You get nothing. They say that you pay for it, we'll give it to you. And developing countries like India and others, they find it very difficult to pay for that. So FDI is one way that you allow, and then people come and they set up their things. But do they bring the best of the technology? You have seen that we have not got an entry into NSG. Because we are not as, technology superpower house. They don't consider it as that we are at the cutting edge of the technology. If we had done that, probably we would have been knocking at the door in a much more definitive manner that we have been doing it today. And this is where one of the biggest challenge for the sustainability lies. Be it a North-North agreement, be it even a South-South agreement. I was one of the negotiators for India, Brazil, South Africa, what we call as the IBSA agreement. And Brazil told us they have Embraer as an aircraft. We said that, why don't you set up it here? They said, no, we don't want to do that. They will want to go to some other place. So ultimately, they said that we have invested a lot over a period of time. And we don't want to give it to HAL or somebody else in India to make the planes. So IBSA agreement remain a bond, still bond agreement. It couldn't prosper because of these issues. So this is one aspect. Now, so where are we now? Can the government fund the technological developments? They have a big role in that. They have certainly a big role in that. But where is the money? Close to about 80% of the budget is a committed liability. Interest, subsidies on food and fertilizer, and of course the defense. So where is the money then? So there is a very little fiscal space for the government, which we call it the budget on 28th of February. We keep talking about that and making little bit of change here and there. The government salary is another one, which is a committed liability. So the government has very little space. And it's good that the GST, in the most suboptimal form that it is trying to come in, is coming now. And we have to see how it spans out, because if you see GST, it's considered an ATM machine by most of the countries, because it can give you a lot more money. In fact, people often say, oh, if GST is a regressive tax, because it taxes the poor as well as the the rich people at the same level, the consumption basket, and at the same level. So the percentage of the income that a rich man gives for the consumption is much less than the percentage that it gives is given by the poor people. So it's regressive. But despite its regressivity, it's a very good tax because it gives you a lot more taxes. The progressivity aspect can always be handled through direct taxes or some other forms. So while government can attend its social justice issues or social equity issues through the direct taxes, the ATM machine has to be nurtured and did well. But we have so far been fighting on the state versus center. And the big reason for that is that the GST is basically a unitary tax, is not a federal tax. Because If you see the example of Canada or Brazil or any other federal system, there have been compromises and compromises in that. And so India is also doing the same way. But good that we are ultimately having some form of GST, which just brings the goods and services, which will bring down the cost of doing business. But more important, through the technology, if you see that the example of Korea in 1980s, if their producer price index was here, today it is here. They have just reduced with the help of technology everything, and then create a lot more money which they can invest abroad, and the payments from abroad to their own country and become rich. So while the taxes are important, the government needs to create a lot more. At the moment, I think the budget size is about 16 lakh crores, which in terms of taxes is only 16 to 17% of the GDP, which is very, very low. Even our own neighbors have it around 22%. So to climb that, we need to add 5% more of taxes. And I hope that happens so that the government can allocate a lot more productive assets or productive money to the development of technology and to 2 minutes. Now I'm on the. So I felt that we need to answer all these questions together. And it is, people who are aspiring to be bankers, you can find your niche, what you plan to do it. But it is very important for somebody who is an engineer and turning into banker to bring out a different methodology to support a particular project and bring sustainability to the whole aspect. There's a space for the fiscal space is much more compromised from the government point of view, and the government, despite everything, because the numbers are also growing, the challenges are growing, they will have a very little space. So you have a challenge in terms of technology, in terms of looking at the whole appraisal issues in a very, very different framework. And this is what I wanted to convey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we have got time for taking 2 to 3 bullet point questions. You can spare them to any of the panelists. Mike.
You have a column, I guess.
I don't need.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question is there a lack of political consensus to address the issue of NPS? Because it, as per the statements mentioned, it keeps on happening, like it's a kind of vicious cycle. And it did happen in 1990s, and it did happen, it is just, the country is facing the issue right now as well. Lack of political consensus, because it is a problem which is there with the high net worth individuals, because one of the panelists even mentioned that it's with just the 100 people, who are facing the issue. I mean, the 90% of NPS gone with them. So how can we deal with that apart from just the recent 6 months before, when the government had come up with legislation that the banks can recover those NPAs? I mean, they did come up with something like that. And my second question is regarding the kind of capital infusion, required. I mean, isn't privatization of public sector banks a solution for the problem apart from M&As? And what are the issues, that the PSBs face in privatization, apart from the employees that are not agreeing to that?
What is the good name?
Sparsh.
Question can be taken by Rishi sir or
Anybody, sir.
Yeah, anyone. One each, sir. NPA.
You will add, I will just start. The senior colleague will add wherever I will. Dear, see, the all solution in our Indian economy, this is my personal view, not from anybody else. All our decisions in this economy are taken politico-economic solutions. So it has a politico-economic solution, they will find it. About, see, top people holding NPAs, some drastic has to be done from the government, and I'm very sure if you are following the newspapers, from right from top of the country, everyone is writing so much about it that they will not leave anybody who holds the public money. Because my money is clearly public money. It is your and my money.
Yeah.
Nothing is there beyond public money. But they are on the, but complications are too much. Realizing money is a big issue. I give you a small example. We even hold a very good securities in certain cases. Selling off that property to realize, see, bank money is again a problem. There is no buyer at the moment for buying that outrightly. And if we sell them, lower the, see, our loan commitments, the big haircuts are to be taken. Who will take that haircuts? It is a very big decision. Some very strong mechanism has to be there. Some protection to the bankers has to be there to take such a drastic decisions. That is your number one. Number two, changing financial, commercial, government institutions into a private institution. It has a, see, own implications. The most complicated implication which I foresee is, as on date, all government banks, they are working on a socio-economic environment. Our 90% decisions are social decisions, 10% are commercial decisions. But once we privatize, all our stakeholders, they will look to the profits. They will look to the bottom line numbers, which are not very healthy for the banks. That is going to be the biggest issue. Rest, other unions and staff and others, that is the common thing that can be addressed. Sooner or later, they will adjust. But how to adjust from social banking balance sheet to commercial banking balance sheet, this will be a big challenge.
Well, I agree with most of the points made by Sri Jutshi. I'd like to supplement if NPA is a very complex issue. It is due to internal factors, it is due to external factors. Without going into the details of the issue, let me give you a few stark examples. How it can be the result of some policies, some global issues. For example, you find that the steel industry is in the doldrums all over the world. In India, we find a particular, the severity of the problem is of much greater degree because of a huge dumping by China and some other countries. So there are certain factors beyond our control. Of course, there could have been better monitoring, better project appraisal, post-disbursement supervision, but there are also some macroeconomic factors which are beyond our control. About the convergence on the differences across the party lines, convergence in thinking on change in the makeup of banks to greater private equity participation. Some such things are already in the offing, but the government has made it repeatedly clear on the floor of parliament elsewhere that under no case, in no case, the equity holding of the government would fall below 51%. Most banks now it is between 60 to 70%. Apart from that, having said that, there are several welcome developments. If you've been following the newspapers, the sessions of parliaments, in the last 3 months, there have been some very welcome development in the sense that the SARFAESI Act, which had come as a big boon, that has been strengthened, that has been given much more teeth, right? Has much more stringent provisions. In some states, we call the district magistrates, some states we call the district collectors. They have been given wide-ranging, sweeping powers, and those decrees have to be enforced within 30 days. This is just one example. There are several other measures which give far more teeth, far more stringency to the. Similarly, you'd be aware that the bankruptcy code, which is on the lines of the code passed, which has already been in existence so in US for more than 30 years, has already been implemented. So taken together, these are very welcome developments. As long as banks are there, there will be some element of default, there will be some delinquencies, but as long as the thing is kept within manageable proportion, I think things should be acceptable. Thank you.
Yeah, any other question?
Sir,
Your name?
Can I add?
Yeah.
I am not from the banking sector, as you already know, but I was writing a chapter on the tax collection for the Tax Reform Commission. And in that, I did a lot of, look at a lot of laws which is prevalent in the banking sector in the other countries. And one of the point which came out, and which is what I would want to say, is that don't follow the debt, follow the debtor. That is the key point. You may keep following, and which is also true for the income tax, the tax department. Tax department, particularly they say in income tax, they collect about 7 lakh crores, and 5 lakh crores is a debt, tax debt, is the area which has not been paid. So the question of these NPAs and the debts not being followed is almost the same between the banking sector and the tax side. Having said that, the second point, which most of the other countries have done, have used the data analytics and brought the predictive analysis as to go ahead of it and find out who actually is going to default. So you go ahead of it and you take care of the NPAs. Things like that has to happen. Whether something like this has happened in the banking sector, I'm not really sure.
No, new things have come, willful defaulters have come, joint lender forums have come, then the provisionings have been made. So there are a lot of things the government is doing. And now the next question, sir.
Coincidentally, I interned in a bank, and my mentor always told me that fintech companies are the next thing, the future. So my question is to Bimal sir, so how would banks or other financial institutions leverage on technology and reduce that vacuum for funding all those projects?
So to kind of rephrase your question so that I understand it properly, you're asking whether banks are going to leverage on fintech companies to reduce the cost of operations? Is that the question? Undoubtedly. I'll tell you, banks have hit a point, and I'm only referring to international banks, where they've found that revenues have hit a standstill. And if they are to increase shareholder value, they have to focus on costs. Okay, so we are looking at opportunities to work with companies who will help institute new technologies to reduce our back-end costs. It's not very apparent to any of you here how intensive banking operations are. Any intern who gets absorbed into a bank will spend a year in the back end to understand a bank, so that when they come to the front, they know exactly what they're taking on when they promise business to a client. So I don't know if I've answered your question in its entirety, but fintech companies are also a challenge to banks, right? I'm presuming you understand that many of them are now stepping in and delivering products that banks are already been delivering for over a lifelong, generations, and they're doing it much more efficiently. So the challenge to us as bankers is to figure out whether we need to compete or need to exit. At present, we're so well entrenched that we're competing. But I would say that the way these people are so efficient and so nimble, it's becoming increasingly difficult to compete with young minds.
Yeah. I think we don't have time, but I'll share the email IDs of all the panelists. So if you still have any questions, you can shoot the mail, and I'll request the panelists to please exceed always, because for us, at this age, you are important. You are our customer, right? That's our KYC and KYE. Now I'll request my senior faculty member, Dr. Badnali Chakladar, to just sum it up. And I thank all the panelists personally for sparing their precious time and coming to IMI and deliberating their knowledge, aspirations. And you all have been a wonderful audience. Thank you. And Banali ma'am.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor Deepak Tandon for calling me a senior faculty colleague. And then after that, I would like to thank the organizing committee to, let me give the vote of thanks to such distinguished panelists. You know, practitioners, visionaries from the financial sector, from the corporate world, from taxation service, policymakers who are here to share their views with all of you. And, it's always an addition to whatever you learn in the classroom, a good supplement. So thank you very much, all the panelists who have taken, of course, time from their busy schedule. And, that goes without saying. And it's a very standard line. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule. But I would really thank all of you for really taking out half a day, more than half a day, because traveling in Delhi also takes another half. So it's almost a full day, and spending time with all of you. And I could see the the sparks in your eyes when you were actually giving your practical inputs to these students, and it was really good to see that they are on a listening mode when they are in front of practitioners like you. In front of us, don't want to comment. Okay. So I thank you, Dr. Manoranjan Sharma, sir. You ran us through the process of financial reforms done during the previous few decades. And we appreciate your optimistic view about Indian financial sector. You're highlighting the possibility of becoming demographic disaster from demographic dividend is indeed thought-provoking. Thank you, Mr. S.K. Jutsi. We appreciate the way you shared your experience and knowledge on Indian banking sector and the opening, and its opening to the global world also. And your views on practical aspects of banking are commendable. You emphasized on growth of banking sector despite the challenges like regulations, fraud, stringent norms because of Basel, and particularly the risk-weighted assets, etc., infrastructure, etc. And it is really important, what you said is really important for all of us to find ways of making our financial products globally competitive. Thank you, Mr. Balachandar. Thank you very much. And I keep on, hearing that Bala sir from Ernst & Young, and I'm so happy to meet you today, and thank you for coming. Mr. Balachandar, your speech was so very motivating and so very positive, and your suggestions on more and more use of digital solution for transformation is well taken. And thank you. You mentioned that inclusiveness of more and more people will create more opportunities. And last but not the least, your inputs about sustainable development in the sector is well appreciated. And let me also thank Mr. Bimaldeep Singh. Mr. Singh, you said something, you mentioned about the paradox of pricing loan with high pricing when it's a startup, and then chasing the person when the person is a successful one. This is really a thought-provoking sentence that has come from Mr. Bimaldeep Singh, because maybe that is the reason, why 60 to 70% of the loan in a bank's balance sheet, you will find to top 8 to 10 customers. And that is the reason why, there is so much of default and NPAs, because you are actually concentrating on a particular segment with 8 to 10 concentrated customers. This is exactly Mr. Bimaldeep Singh said, and he said it's a paradox of pricing of bank loans. Thank you so much. And you simplified the government policies. That's the best thing about it. You simplified the government policies and policies on financing of sustainable energy, and you gave brilliant practical examples. Your advice to sustainable business about taking green fund is a win-win one. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay Kumar sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for throwing the question about balancing between consumption and passing it on to the next generation, to the future generation. It's a brilliant thought. He said that, we have to consume in the best possible way, and also we have to pass it on to the future generation without compromising on our consumption. So that itself says, that it is a very difficult task. It's easy to say, but it's really difficult to balance it. And thanks for broadening the horizon by moving ahead from balance sheet and moving to social and environmental aspects. Thank you very much for bringing in aspects of technology transfer, which actually doesn't take place free of cost. So you were, I think, emphasizing, you were wanting to emphasize on transfer pricing policy for technology transfer, maybe, and much. Thank you all the panelists, and we hope to see you again. Thank you.
We can't look at the financial growth as a standalone. We must look at the bigger picture of sustainable development, leveraging it with the technological advancement and incorporating the demographic dividend that is the USP of our country. On behalf of everyone present here, I express my sincere gratitude to Mr. R. Balachandar, Mr. Bimal Deep Singh, Mr. Manoranjan Sharma, Mr. S.K. Zutshi, and Mr. Sanjay Kumar for taking time out from their very busy schedule and sharing their thought-provoking insights with all of us. Thank you for the valuable knowledge that you have imparted to us through this discussion. I'm sure that we shall keep in our minds all that you have said and imbibe in our knowledge into our decisions as future managers. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Deepak Tandon for consenting to be the moderator for this session and conducting the session in a highly coordinated manner.
Now we would like to present the distinguished speakers for the session with a small token of our appreciation. Mr. R. Balachandar, sir, we were honored to have you here with us today. May I request Professor Gauri Shankar to kindly present Mr. Balachandar with a memento as a token of our appreciation. Mr. Bimal Deep Singh, sir, we were honored to have you here with us today. May I request Professor Prashant Gupta to kindly present Mr. Singh with a memento as a token of our appreciation. Mr. Manoranjan Sharma, sir, we were honored to have you with us today. May I request Professor Aman Srivastava to kindly present Mr. Sharma with a memento as a token of our appreciation. Mr. S.K. Zutshi, sir, it was a privilege listening to you. May I request Professor Deepak Tandon to kindly present Mr. Zutshi with a memento as a token of our appreciation. Mr. Sanjay Kumar, sir, it was a privilege listening to you. May I request Professor Barnali Chakladar to kindly felicitate Mr. Kumar with a memento as a token of our appreciation. Professor Deepak Tandon, sir, we were honored to have you with us today. May I request Akash Gupta, Secretary Finance Club, to kindly felicitate Professor Deepak Tandon with a memento as a token of our appreciation. I request our speakers to kindly sign a mug and write a short message for us to keep as the memoirs of Conventus 2016.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we conclude the session of the Finance Summit. We are sure that the session has been very enlightening for each and every one of you present here. On the behalf of Finance Club of IMI, I would like to take this opportunity to commend all the guests, participants, speakers, professors, students, and staff of IMI for making the session an unparalleled success, as well as the media persons for covering the event. We would also like to thank our sponsors for helping us in this endeavor. Our sponsors are co-sponsor RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, powered by Panasonic smartphones. We would also like to thank our partners, nutrition partner IndiaGate, food partner Pat and Harry, food partner Burger.in, beverage partner Hector Beverages, website partner Acunity Software Private Limited. Also, may I take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, American Express, CADB, Respite Holding, Safe Pocket Money, NTPC, Allahabad Bank, Pizza Hut, and Punjab National Bank. Thank you all. We request the guests to proceed to the lobby area for snacks and refreshments. Students are please requested to stay back.